Good evening, everybody. This is my latest video, hopefully a brief video. This is work that I've set on behalf of Mr. Walton. This is some exam question practice. This idea we're trying to consolidate what we're doing rather than race ahead. So this is on changing places. What I've got for you on this slide, which you've already got the email and the PowerPoint with these questions on it. There's 2 6 markers and a 20 marker for you to attempt to do. And the deadline looks quite short, but hopefully you have got a reasonable amount of time to crack on with this. But let me know if you're struggling with it. Now, ideally, you would email your responses to Mr. Wilson, sorry, I almost said Mr. Wincott there. But likewise, if you've got any questions and you feel that you want to sort of run it past me, then I'm more than happy to try and help. I teach this unit as well. I taught this current year's 13, the unit. So I've got lots of the resources and have a good understanding on it, and also being an examiner, I've marked it. Now, the 3 questions I put on this PowerPoint, the first 6 marker is an analysis question. It's all AO3. The second one is using a resource, but then you applying your understanding of geography, evaluating the resource, which looks similar, but actually is very different. And then there's a 20 marker to look at, okay? So if we get started with this one here, now usually the first 6 marker on all the questions is quite a different sort of feel to this. This is an example where you have text, and within the text you've got ideas that you have to, a bit like a comprehension exercise in some ways, you have to pick out the right geography and weigh it up. Usually we have that an acronym PATEAM, pattern, trend, evidence, anomalies, manipulation of data. That works well with graphs and maps, combination of that, tables, all those sorts of things. Not quite so easy, this one, and that's why this is good to practice. And I do feel the changing places unit is quite abstract, is a little bit different, and does get you to look at resources slightly differently. So what we've got here is an article, which is a source, which you have to be able to analyse, as it would do with an AO3 skill. It's on Bristol, something that it did in year 10. That's irrelevant here. And it talks about a lot of reasons how it's grown and what's caused it to grow and what's caused it to become a thriving community, both socially and economically. So there's loads of information in here, okay? And this is someone's viewpoint, as well as maybe being an article. You can see it's from the Sunday Times. Bristol's a key city within the UK. So you would need to look through that, read through that properly. Now, if you look at the question here, just move the slide on. A little bit small here for me, but hopefully you're seeing a better version than I am. And it says, analyse the extent to which endogenous factors are responsible for Bristol being named the best place to live in the UK. So if I'm looking at this, let's see if this works here. Got to do this quite carefully because the thing is quite slow. There's the command word, analyse. So remember, what you're doing here is you are trying to pick things by reading that source, examining it, and plucking out things that are relevant to doing a high-level description. But this is a slightly quirky way of doing this. Now, if we look at some of the important things, if we're using a bug system, there's the word endogenous. Something just strange has happened to my screen. Don't know why it's done that. And responsible. So let's just see if I can use the eraser. There we go. That worked. New equipment. Let's see if I can get it working this time. There we go. And that just crashed on the floor. Let's hope I haven't damaged something. I'm not going to re-record this video, so I'll have to put up with some rubbishy edits here. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Okay, so basically, let's have a look at this here. So if we break this, glance back at the question, we box the command word, we've underlined a couple of the important words, and we're glancing back at the question here. Endogenous means internal factors. That could be both physical and human factors. You're not being asked to bring anything new. You're not trying to say particularly one factor is better than the other. What you do need to do is go back to that source and actually identify the information in there. Says, look, internal factors, endogenous factors have actually caused or made Bristol a great place to live. Notice I'm rewording the question here. So if I go back here, there will be things on here that are purely about the internal side of Bristol. So if you have a look at this one here, it says the southwestern city may be small, but it's big on creativity, culture, and community spirit. and adding easy access to glorious coasts and countryside, it's a deserving champion, says Tim Palmer. Now you have to look at that and decide, is that talking about things within Bristol making it a success or a wonderful place to live, or is it saying there are things around it externally? And remember, that's human and physical. Another word for physical would be natural factors. So you need to go through all these paragraphs here, 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs, and pluck out the things that you think are endogenous factors, but then go on to say, link it to why Bristol has been successful. You might spot a few thins in here that you think are exogenous. So factors that, yes, there are endogenous factors that I can see here have made Bristol a great place to live in the United Kingdom, but there are also some exogenous factors, okay? You don't need to be, writing a massively long response. Half a page will do. And it needs to be concise, but you definitely need to use evidence from here, but you're commenting on it. The commentary aspect here is taking something from here that you think is an endogenous factor and then going on to explain how that has made Bristol a successful place, okay? Not your classic style of the first 6 marker, but this is a skills one, okay? So we need to practice that, okay? All right, let's move on to the next one. Oh, sorry, there's the mark scheme. So again, you can work your way through some of these points here. It's not the be all and end all. And it's quite difficult to interpret this mark scheme up here, but your teachers will be able to do that for you, i.e. myself and Mr. Wilson. And this is some of the things that they're looking for. Now, personally, trusting you here, I would try to do the question first to kind of build your skills at answering these questions, and then look at the mark scheme to see if you've got some similar things. Remember, as I said, this is not all the definitive answers. If you're really struggling with it, you might look at it and then attempt to answer it, because you kind of reverse engineer it just to get the grasp of it. And at the end of the day, we're just trying to make you stronger and more confident at answering these questions. Okay, all right. So the next one, and you can see we've got another text-based source here. And this one here is about Skegness. A seaside resort. Bristol's a seaside resort and Blackpool's a seaside resort. But if you look here, we have a headline, and it's a battle. No, not a real battle, like a battle of propaganda, promotion, advertising. And what they're saying here, Skegness has really, when it says depict, has put down Brighton and Blackpool as not very attractive area. That's a bold statement. And then it goes on to talking about how they've done that, the techniques and done that. And also goes on to here, a bit more detail here. And you can see here, it's offended people. That probably is in Skegness as well, but also definitely would be in Brighton and Blackpool. So it's a strategy. All seaside resorts, pretty much in the United Kingdom, took a massive hit in the 1960s onwards, struggled and have struggled ever since. Yes, some have resurged. So this is an element of the unit, because you're talking about rebranding, re-imaging a place, but in this instance, rebranding in a way to make somewhere else look worse. So the question here is asking, using that figure, using your understanding, so bringing in your geography that you know about re-imaging, rebranding, to kind of make a judgment. So if you look at this one here, going to have another attempt at doing this. There's our command word there, evaluate, rebranding is an important word. Corporate bodies, so that's important. Corporate bodies like things like London Docklands Development Corporation, Tourist Board, local councils. It could even be a private organisation as well. And it says, look, to influence, pardon me, place meaning, and therefore shape the actions of individual businesses. Now, there's quite a lot to unpick there. So you've really got to think about that question. In essence, what you're doing is, if we simplify that, you drive with figure 5 and you think, right, in figure 5, a corporate body, which is identified in there, has tried to influence people's opinions about Brighton and, I forgot the other name of the place now, in a negative way. So they're trying to influence people's actions and opinions about other places to their detriment. So you can see that to their gain. And what you have to do is you're saying, is that a good strategy? What are the strengths and weaknesses of that strategy? So in that, you might talk about some of the strengths, as in how segments might actually attract more business and things like that. But then you might also talk about how Blackpool and Brighton have actually could decline as a result of that. But you might also be talking about why you don't think it's a good strategy, how it might backfire, how it might actually upset some of the people that live within Skegness. So your own knowledge could be things like getting across the understanding of what rebranding means. The fact that you know what's a good point and a bad point of that strategy would also be developed from your understanding of the course. And I suppose you could even bring in some examples from what you've learned with Mr. Wilton on some of the case studies, examples that you've learned. But again, remember, this is a 6-marker. You're not writing a long essay on this. So no more than a couple of paragraphs. So you've got to be quite succinct. You absolutely need to be talking about figure 5. Okay, that's absolutely critical to doing this. Okay, all right. So moving on to the next bit, there's a mark scheme. It just breaks down the levels. And you can see here, if you do go back a few slides, this 6-marker, there's no AO3 marks. In reality, you are doing some AO3 skills because you're able to go into that resource and use it. But you're not going to get marks for quoting statistics, specific names. That resource is like a giant launch pad into the answer. So it's giving you the ideas to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of rebranding, okay, and how it affects place meaning and people's opinions and shapes individual actions of businesses. Okay, so AO2 is your evaluative aspect, interpretation. There's your knowledge aspect, so your understanding of rebranding and so forth. And on the next slide, it's a bit cramped, but you can see here, look, there's the AO1. You can expand this because you'll have the PowerPoint, and there's some other information there that support your answer. It's got some specific examples, and you won't necessarily cover the examples they've used here. Okay, all right. Hope I'm not going too fast. I'm hoping this is making sense. Okay, so moving on to the 20 marker here. So quite tricky. And I'll just whiz through a few of the slides just so you get the overview of what I'm providing you here. So you've got the question here that you've got to, again, bug. You've got to break that down. Here's the mark scheme. Okay. Here's where the notes start to build up. There's the AO1 content. Remember, AO1 is anything that's referenced to scale, reference to knowledge of concepts, key terms, ideas, and then also things like, you know, your case studies, your examples, facts and figures and things like that. And the AO2 bit here is the supporting evidence that you would use to answer the question, but very much about explaining. There's that word analysis in a different form from the first 6-marker, evaluating the sort of question and finally coming up with a conclusion. And then the bottom here on the very last slide, I put a tutor to you marking grid, which kind of shows the distribution of the different pillars, which I've talked about before. So you might have to rotate this round because I've done this on A4 size. And this one here, scale. There's the concept one. There's really the case study one. That's kind of like making links, linking theories and key terms. There's the actual analysis evaluation, and there's a bit on conclusion. Let's have a look at the question itself now. See if I've got it. Here we go. Okay, right. Okay, so back to this. So again, like an artiste, I shall try to do this because for some reason my screens are very small. There's evaluate, so that means weigh up. On the one hand, this. On the other hand, this. More of an argument. And if you look at here, we've got external forces. We've got lived experience, and it says local or distant that you've studied. Now, the examiner's not going to know where you've studied, but if you are doing local, I would suggest if you talk about someone like Detroit, Los Angeles, New York as your local place, it's unlikely it's going to be your local place. That said, done. I don't think I'd mark it down as an examiner because I suppose there is the argument some students abroad might be living in New York and might actually be answering that question, could be local to it. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about that too much. Now it says here, external forces might include. If you look at the question here, use the mouse instead here, it says that one or more external forces. So you might focus it on government policies, multinational corporations, what we call transnational corporations, international or global institutions. So you can get maximum marks for just doing one of these or all three of these. Now, the only disadvantage of doing all three, it's more tricky to piece it together. You might feel it's a bit more complex to do, and you might spread yourself too thinly. Definitely, we have done some stuff on government policies and multinational corporations. I do feel actually that it does lend itself to talking about all three things. Now, it says in the local or distant place you've studied. So if it was local, really you're talking about Chelmsford. Okay. So within that, if you were deciding to do Chelmsford, you would need to talk about some of the things would be how it's actually changed. So this is not in the actual essay per se, but you need to be thinking about in like, how am I going to answer this? So, well, how has Chelmsford changed? You can talk about the urban landscape, you know, how it's changed over time. And we've done a PowerPoint and research on this. You could talk about how the culture has changed. You could talk about the social side has changed, the demographics. You will need to go into your sources that you got for that, the little mini project that you did put together for that. And within that, then you need to look at the reasons that it's changed and so forth. Now, you need to link it to government policies. You need to, I'll start with this one here. A good one for that would be maybe a distant place. Now, for that, you could either use Brixton, not Brixton, sorry, that's a different class. You could use Brick Lane, sorry, I had to think there for a second, Brick Lane, or you could indeed use the London Docklands Development Corporation case study that we did. Now, so I think the London Docklands Development Corporation lends itself really well for this, pretty much on all three levels. So if you look at the external force of government policies, well, you could talk about how the Docklands was once thriving and successful. You could talk about its decline. You could talk about why it declined, but you have to be careful not going off on a tangent too much there. It became a really rundown area, almost a sick part of London. And the government decided to invest heavily with private finance as well as government finance. So therefore, you would be hitting these two areas here. That's not to say it's not linked to global institutions or international institutions. But if he certainly talks about this, the government policies would be linked into things like redevelopment, regeneration of urban derelict areas in severe decline, which is what they did in 1982. So you know what it was like beforehand. You've got plenty of pictures and information on that. You know the reasons why it declined. And you can actually, on from those slides and background work, talk about what government policies were put into place. So, for example, an urban development corporation, which is to say mix between government and private funding. And they set up this corporation. The most famous one of that would be the LDDC, worked between 1982 and 1997. And they did 4 key areas where they looked at improving transport, housing, jobs, infrastructure, services. So they did a number of things that they actually improved, and you got many of those statistics on that PowerPoint, or should have. So you can talk about what they did, and then you can go on to say how it's actually changed the landscape. So if you, I mean, I'm really summarizing this up here. You think about a lot of the Docklands in the past. It was the world's biggest port at one point, but the port was quite small. There were lots of Victorian tenements. It was all very tightly knit together, small roads. You probably said low-skilled, semi-skilled workforce, like dockers and people working in the associated factories. Low incomes, but a good, strong, thriving community. Now, the Docklands declined because of the containerization aspect, so they really struggled. So high unemployment, lots of deprivation, services becoming poorer. So you can talk about what it was like. You can see the socio-economic things you could talk about. And then you say, this is what they did. So things like Canary Wharf, Jubilee Line, the DLR, City Airport, lots of the housing that's been changed. And one of the aspects of that was that over a period of time, some of the original community effectively felt pushed out, both financially and socially. And you had these high-income, middle-income groups coming in and effectively taking over. And many of the new things that came in, well, the people who used to live there didn't have the right qualifications, skill sets to take advantage of those jobs. So you can see where you could talk about this, but you do have to evaluate. So this is where, once you've mapped out what you're going to talk about, like I've just done, You then need to think, okay, so which bits am I talking about there? Certainly multinational corporations are there. HSBC, Barclays Bank, they're TNCs, MNCs, they're all there. They want that city location because of its centrality. Global institutions probably operate on some level there, or certainly influence that, globalization and things like that, which is not an institution, but certainly a process by which that area has thrived, and therefore it's acted as a magnet for businesses to come in. But if you want to keep it simple, probably lead with this, and I'll probably bring in an element of this and maybe not worry too much about this. But it says evaluate the role. So we have to be careful here, not just doing one big rambling case study. You're evaluating one of these. So let's pretend you've just done the government policy and you're talking about the Urban Development Corporation. Enterprise zone, if you want to include that as well, the Isle of Dogs. So what you're doing is you're just saying, well, what did it actually do? So you could go into thinking this, well, actually, I think it's done some good, but on the other hand, I think it's done some negatives. So that'd be one simplistic structure. Set out your introduction, state a few key terms, make sure you give the purpose of your essay title, go on to maybe set the framework on which you'll demonstrate your answer to this. And then you might go, actually, the LDDC did these following things for the following reasons, and in this way it was successful. And then you give some facts and figures and different categories and talk about, how the experience has changed, maybe in a positive way. And then you might go, the second half of the essay might go, but on the other hand, here are some of the negative aspects, which I've mentioned and things like that. And then you come up to your conclusion. Another way might be to think, right, okay, well, I will talk about 4 or 5 different sorts of categories like transport, education, housing, job opportunities, those sorts of things. And then take each of those in turns and then talk about the strengths and weaknesses, or the pros and cons of each of those. And then, so you're kind of going for and against as you're going along through the essay, different approach, just as good. Neither approach is better than the other. And then coming up with a conclusion. Remember a couple of things here: peel, point, evidence, explain, link back to the question. At the end of every paragraph, you should either do a written link back to the question, so you feel like you're answering an aspect of the question, or at least pause and look back at your question and think, am I actually answering this question? Am I giving a chunk of the puzzle here to answering the question? Okay, so it's important to do that link. Some people even put links at the beginning of their paragraphs, but certainly make clear points. You might even plan those out before you write it. You must have evidence, so use a case study. London Docklands is brilliant for that, but so is Brick Lane, so is Chelmsford. That just depends on the quality of what you've done. Okay, the conclusion, remember, you answer the question. Okay, so you have to make a decision. I think go be direct, then give some compelling evidence, the strengths, and then as an extension to your conclusion, you might then recognize the complexity of the situation. In some cities or some areas, or over time, in fact, you may think that as the community has changed, there things have really improved. Now, I've not broken this down in the same way with extra PowerPoint slides and things like that, so apologies for that. But I'd rather get this video clip out to you sooner rather than later. Like me, I'm absolutely snowed under with lots of different bits of work and things like that. So I hope you're staying positive. Miss teaching you guys, so I look forward to seeing you when you get back. I might be completely grey-haired then. My daughter was going to cut my hair, so and she had a very strange smile when she was given permission to do that. So I could even be bald when you next see me. Okay, so keep positive, do your best. I've already seen some fantastic essays. I am going to mark them, not all the essays on the Coast ones in yet, but keep working hard. You're an amazing group. All right, so I'm going to stop there, sign off, and I'll see you on the next session. Okay, bye then, guys.